Welcome to the Love Holistic Living podcast, your roadmap to heal and align mind, body, and soul and become intuitive through food, pleasure, and spirituality with your host and Italian friend, Sara Garofalo. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Love Holistic Living podcast with your Italian friend and spiritual healer, Sara Garofalo, with Love Holistic Living. I have a special guest today. Her name is Kristina Bentle. She's the founder of Awaken Mom Life and the Collective Healers, a lifelong learner and storyteller. Kristina is pursuing a doctorate in neuroscience and trauma, blending her rich life experiences with cutting edge science and spirituality to heal collective consciousness. Love it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited. I love the blend between science and spirituality. I think that makes a powerful union.
Absolutely.
And yeah. So I'm excited. But tell us more about you.
Sure. So where to start? Kind of what got me here. I started out with trauma, but I didn't
Mhm.
even know it. And to give you a little bit of backstory before I even got there, so childhood trauma, neglect, um, being assaulted when I was in middle school and again in college. I became a widow when I was 24.
Mhm.
I had lost my best friend 2 years before that. So he passed away shortly after my best friend passed away. So I had a lot of trauma on top of trauma. Like it was layers and layers. But if you had asked me, I'm like, no, I don't have trauma. Like other people have, like, mine's not that bad.
Mm.
And it got to the point where my body was starting to fail more and more. I remember having chronic pain when I was in high school. Like my best friend and I, we would go to the amusement park and I couldn't walk around because of my back and my feet. They hurt so bad. I just thought everybody experienced that level of pain.
Mm.
So as I got older, my health continued to deteriorate. I have a daughter. My pregnancy was awful. It was horrible. It was painful. And every year I'd get a new diagnosis. I have endometriosis, GERD, fibromyalgia, Hashimoto's disease, like
Mhm.
all kinds of stuff, just layering. And it got to the point where my trauma had pushed me in my career. So
Right.
I was really
Mhm.
successful in my career. I was a high achiever, didn't recognize at the time that that was a trauma response. So I was in marketing for 20 years, climbing the corporate ladder, and it was interfering with my jobs. So little by little, like my tenure at my jobs would get shorter and shorter because of the trauma, but I still didn't know it. And then when I was 37, I was bedridden. We had moved back from Hawaii. We had gone to Hawaii. It was like my dream.
Mhm.
And then it didn't work out and we had to come home. And little did I know at that time, that was kind of like the final trauma that my body just couldn't handle anymore.
Mhm.
So I started getting numbness in my hands, my feet. I started not being able to function. I would pass out. And I was going to doctors and doctor after doctor. They're like, we don't know what's wrong. All your tests are fine. Everything's normal. I went through a whole panel of tests for over a year.
Mhm.
And it was so disheartening because I knew at that point I had been studying mindfulness and practicing self awareness for over a decade. I had been going to therapy for 15 years.
Mhm.
And it was funny, therapists would always tell me about how insightful I was about my problems. I'm like, I get that, but I'm still severely anxious. Like, I don't understand what's happening. How can I improve this? Like, it was getting to the point where I would see therapists and they would kind of send me off, like, I can't help you. I don't know what else to do for you. And
Mm.
so when my body started shutting down, I finally saw a local neurologist who encouraged me to go to the Cleveland Clinic. And I'm like, I don't think they're going to take me. Like, they can only take special cases, right? Well, I got accepted to Cleveland Clinic and I found a neurologist who finally gave me a diagnosis of functional neurological disorder.
Mhm.
And I am still disabled by it today. I still am not able to work full time. I can't um, function, quote unquote, like most people do. So I've
Yeah.
had to really adjust my lifestyle. But it's an aggregation of all the trauma that I had gone through and it affects on my body. And then that's what opened the door for me to start healing and understanding how does trauma impact the brain, the body, the nervous system.
Mm.
all of the components, and it has changed my life in ways that I'm happier now. Even though I have a lot of limitations and restrictions, I'm far more happy now than I've ever been in my entire life.
Wow, that's a powerful story. I mean, for anyone listening, going through trauma and Kristina's story, you probably know my story, but it's true. Like trauma will impact the body.
Yeah.
Right. So from your perspective or what you've studied, and I'm always so interested in learning more, but how does trauma impact the brain and the body?
I could talk about this for hours, so I'll try to keep it high level, but I know for me the key and the foundation for my understanding was developmental trauma. So trauma that happens early in life and childhood and how that impacts the brain. So what happens is when you have toxic stress running through your
Mhm.
system as a child during those developmental years, it starts to shift how your brain grows. And those small shifts, your body has to start making concessions, if you will. So, to give more energy to the part of your brain that feels stress, because that is highly activated, it reroutes energy. So then that part of your brain gets bigger. So the other parts of your brain,
Wow.
like your prefrontal cortex, which is crucial for things like executive functioning, for memory, for emotional regulation. By the way, these are all things that are really important in therapy. So
Mhm.
when you have trauma, cognitive behavioral therapy can be difficult because that part of your brain, if it didn't develop properly in childhood, doesn't work
Mm.
the same way for you. So that was really important for me to understand. And my brain had developed differently. So when I was feeling anxiety, constant, like debilitating anxiety. I
Mm.
lived with anxiety that just interfered with all aspects of my life, and I couldn't understand why. And when I finally started to realize that, I'm like, it makes sense. It makes sense why my body feels like I'm ready to jump out of my skin every 10 seconds, because it is I'm on high alert for everything. And at first it was disheartening because like, okay, am I broken? Like, does this mean I'm stuck this way? Because for a long time, modern medicine would tell us that. I had many doctors that would prescribe me depression medication and say, you're going to be on this for the rest of your life. And this is something you have to live with.
Mhm.
Thankfully, that's not true. And we have learned that. And so once I started to understand that, and I started to understand how all these small changes in my brain had shifted my biology. So, for example, high cortisol running through my system, which can
Mm.
deteriorate your gut health. So then you start having stomach
Right.
problems. It can lead to it's like a ripple effect. And once I started to peel away the layers, like it was painful. But at the same time, when I started peeling away the layers, there was a point in my life where I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink without getting like
Mhm.
violent sick. Like I would drink water and throw up, and people thought I was faking it. I'm like, no, it legit, it hurts. I have healed my gut health to the point now where I can eat and it doesn't hurt. And I did not know that that was a thing. I just thought everybody was in
Mm.
pain after eating.
Right. So that's so important what you're saying because so many people don't acknowledge the trauma, right? We live in a society where it's like, well, this happened. You just have to keep going. You just
You
have to,
just,
yeah,
yeah,
you have to put it in a box. You have to keep working. You have to keep going to school. You have to keep, whatever. And so we learn to put it aside and
yeah,
then later on it comes back, it backfires to then lead to the health symptoms, health issues. And it's what we say. It's like, hey, my body's starting to break down. That's the first sign, right? That's what people
yeah.
say.
Yeah. And it's so unfortunate. And that's part of what I aim to do by talking about my story, especially the part about slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
It was forced upon me, and I don't want it to be forced upon people. I want
Mm.
people to be aware of it earlier so that they can figure it out and heal from it before, because what's going to happen is, you're right, like it gets stuck in the body. And this is part of what fascinates me, is that trauma gets stuck at a cellular level. So what
Mm-hmm.
happens, kind of like it's encoded into your genetics, even generational trauma that's passed on through our DNA, and all of these things, they start to layer, and it shifts everything. And yeah, you can try to compartmentalize it, but your brain and your body remember. So if you're aware of the book, The Body Keeps the Score,
Mhm.
side note, I don't necessarily recommend that trauma survivors read because it can be highly triggering.
Mhm.
And it actually can be counterproductive because part of the book is telling you, here's how to calm your body down. But
Yeah.
it's meant for medical professionals. So like one of my goals in life is to write a trauma informed version for people. And that's kind of what I do on my Instagram is I try to a lot of the lessons that I've learned from that book, make them more trauma informed so they aren't as triggering, but they're still it's the same useful information. But your body does really keep the score, and that's not meant to be like a woo-woo concept. It's at a
Mhm.
cellular level, it is the trauma is cycling, and then what happens is it just creates a pattern in your system, in your body, until you release it.
Right, right. So, just to go back to the book, I read it and it was like really intense. So, great advice if you are still in, highly triggered, I would say. Maybe wait a little bit or
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
doing is translating it to make sure that you get the positive message out. And I love that because and me too. Like I'm trying to tell people and I think you're doing that too, but if you've been a trauma survivor, you can heal. You just need to release the trauma because so many people, especially doctors, and I hear this all the time, they give you a prescription and well, this is going to be like that for the rest of your life. And I remember when someone told me that, and I was like, no. Like, I'm the person who's like, this is not going to happen. Like, I'll find a solution because you tell me no, I'll do the opposite. So,
Yeah.
very stubborn in that way. But I just didn't receive the death sentence, I call it,
Yeah.
as the last word.
And I think to that point, there are some people who instantly go to that, and I didn't. So for those that are kind of on the route where they're like, I gave up. I gave up for a long time.
Right.
My trauma, I had the fighter in me, but I realized that fighter was on my career side.
Mhm.
So from a trauma perspective, I've realized this is the fact that sometimes when we compartmentalize, I was using that piece of myself for my career only, but in this other, and for a long time, I could not understand as my career grew. I'm like, I feel like two different people because in my career, I look like one person who is strong, who's in
Right.
control, who has confident. And then I come home and I am codependent. I am afraid. I am like anxious. And it was so confusing to me. And now I look back, I'm like, okay, that's clear sign of traumas when you feel that need to separate parts of yourself. And it can be a survival mechanism to some
Mm,
degree. And I think that that's the hard part too, because there's doctors who are misinformed about what trauma means. So then there's women,
yeah.
especially unfortunately, who are being medically gaslit to believe that, yeah, you're stuck with this. And I believed them for a long time. And it wasn't until I became bedridden and my daughter was, gosh, 5 at the time,
Mhm.
4.5, 5. And I'm like, I know the childhood I had. I cannot allow this to happen to her. And that was when it finally kicked in and like my mindset changed of like, okay, I'm gonna figure something out. I don't care what you say. Like that's when I kind of made that jump to that point of like,
Uh-huh.
okay, uh, yeah, I don't believe you. No.
Yeah, and it's so important what you said because of like the fighter. Like I've had clients that are like, I don't have it in me. And I'm just like, keep going, right? And I realize that maybe I had it I've always been like that. Like you tell me no, and I feel like I never exhaust fully my energy, even though when I'm like so broken. But I was like, okay, but there are some people, and thank you for saying that, that maybe feel like, hey, I'm not like you. And I had to separate myself. So I feel like I don't have the energy to fight back. But,
Yeah.
and so that trauma that splits the two, right? The two energies. And like you're like that in business, but then over here, you're not.
Yeah.
And, but there is at some point that it clicked for you. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point you bring up too, because I wonder when I've worked with clients too that will say that and they can't see that piece of themselves. But I think that it's there because if you have survived trauma and you're still alive, then you're a
Right.
fighter in a sense. And I don't like using that word sometimes because it can have more of the constriction to it. but you're like a survivor. You are to exist when you have trauma, it's harder. And I think we don't give ourselves enough credit. And there are
Mhm.
women that I've worked with where I'm like, you can't see your strength because your strength is so wrapped up in surviving, which is hard.
Yeah.
You can rechannel and move that strength over to an area of growth, which is hard because your brain and body are over here. And then when you
Yeah.
try to go over here, it's resistant because that's what our brain and body does. It likes patterns for a reason because it's more efficient. And when you've used
Yeah.
all your energy to survive and trying to ask it to use a little bit more energy to do something new, it's hard.
Absolutely. I love what you said. And I say this all the time. If you call yourself a survivor, if you are a survivor, know that you're also a warrior. So I like to use that word. It's the warrior archetype in spirituality. Like the warrior is born when you survive. It's inevitable. And so I literally, in spirituality, like through my spiritual journey, I had to call that warrior back with music, with spiritual practices, because I had to fight. And I was fighting for my life, for my kids' life, in court. I was just going through all of it. But yeah, I call it the warrior if we want to give it another name. But
I love that. I actually have been studying more of human design, and one of my top godheads is Minerva, which is the goddess
mm,
of wisdom and war, if I remember correctly, in Roman times. But that it's funny because you say warrior, and I'm like, goddess is where my head goes, like that archetype of like the goddess warrior
right,
almost
right.
is
And
kind
they're,
of what I've been working to embody too, because I'm still going through it. Like my life is not sunshine and rainbows. Like there's still things in my life where I'm still peeling off those layers of trauma. Because when you have built a life of trauma,
mhm,
everything is trauma, like your relationships, your career,
right.
even where you live, all all
Yeah.
of it is
So,
is based
yeah.
on trauma.
And you feel like a little bit helpless. I mean, I know people that feel helpless. I felt helpless,
Yeah,
but then I had enough what you call hope in me in spirit to know like I knew it since I was a kid. I was like I can change my reality and miracle exists because I had read enough books on spirituality and true stories of how people heal their life and I was like this exists. You just have to attune to that vibration or I don't know, understand how you can heal. So in that regards, what is the next step in healing trauma? What would you say?
I love that. And I want to add something really quick too, because that hopelessness, I had it too, right? Like, and I think with you, there was that underlying feeling of that spirit of like, I always knew there was something more, and like I was craving it. And it wasn't until later in my life that I got into the work of like Joe Dispenza and stuff like that,
Mhm.
where people healing themselves. I'm like, if they can do this, I can do this. And
Mm,
I have a lot more of those good days, but there are still times where I have that hopelessness. And I'll be honest with you, 2 days ago, I was back in the woods. We have woods behind us. We have property, and I was crying. And I'm like, I don't understand. I don't know what to do.
mhm.
I want the world to be a happier place, and I want to be able to spread more love. And it's so painful, and this hurts so bad, like my current situation that I'm working to get out of. And that leads into the question that you said, what's next? And I truly believe for trauma healers, it's the
Mhm.
somatic piece of getting in touch with your body.
Mhm.
Because when I was back there and I was feeling those emotions, I used to judge it so harshly. Like, I don't want to put these vibes into the universe when I was going through the spiritual bypassing phase.
Yeah.
And it's weak to feel these emotions when I was just going through the bypassing phase in general, shoving it down. But feeling it and allowing yourself to express it in healthy
Mhm.
ways will allow your body to create a new normal. And then once you start to get in touch with your body, because trauma disconnects you from your body as you're trying to survive, once you start that reconnection, it opens up the gateway to being able to find the ways to heal as you listen
Mhm.
to your body. To me, I believe that your emotions are literally signposts from spirit. Your
Yeah.
emotions. So like if something's uncomfortable, spirit's trying to talk to you. If something feels good, spirit's trying to talk to
Yeah.
you. So can you
I
listen
love
to it?
that. Mhm. Yeah, so and that leads to really understanding your body
Yeah.
and if there is something that I remind everyone, and when you guys are listening to this, is the body is trying to communicate. So if there is something wrong, if you're like, well, my gut hurts or have knee pain, what is that trying to tell you? And so many times we are frustrated. We're like, why aren't you working? Why aren't you
Yeah.
losing weight? Like, and then you create more frustration, right? And I'm like, if you can just practice listening or becoming what you're saying, self aware of. So what you're saying is the body is the gateway
It
to
really is.
releasing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That feeling, those emotions, like expressing it, feeling it. Yeah.
But and me and you have done this for probably many years. I started this. I remember when I was 19, it wasn't even called somatic. You know,
Yeah.
I went into an ashram, and at that time, it was just called movement.
Yeah.
Somatic is such a new age word that just came in like the
It's
past
it's the
couple of
medical
years,
definition. So it's like
right?
that's the new thing. Yeah.
But for and I remember, so I come my trauma response as a kid was to become that type A and detach from my emotions, because as an empath, I was like, if I need to survive, I completely detach from my body, my emotions, right?
Yeah.
But there are still people that maybe feeling so disconnected. So what is the first step? You can say, okay, get into your body, and they're gonna be like,
That's very, yeah, that's a
I
good
don't know
point.
how.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's absolutely a fair point. And I love the our journeys are they're similar, but they're not at the same time. I've only been on my somatic healing journey for 3 years, less than
Mm.
3 years. So that gives you a perspective of you don't have to be doing this for 20 years to finally see results. It took a year and a half before like it started snowballing to the point where before that it was painful. I was doing EMDR,
Hmm.
trauma informed therapy. So if you're not aware, I
Hmm.
15 years of cognitive behavioral therapy, I had hit probably 5 years in, hit the plateau of how far I was going to go. Um, but when it comes to feeling your body, I know Peter, I think it's Peter Levine. He has a lot of great trauma work, trauma books. But there's an exercise, I think that he was the one that taught it, where literally what you do is you tap areas of your body. And it's like, I'm tapping my thumb. I'm tapping my thumb.
Mm.
It and feel it. And then you go through your entire body, like I'm tapping my arm. I'm tapping my arm. And then just go through your body. And that's the sensation as you're doing the tapping and you're bringing awareness to this area of your body. It might seem like this is silly. Why would I do this? It's neuroplasticity. So you're teaching your brain, oh, I'm aware of this part of my body.
Mm.
And once you do that, you grow that part of your brain. You create new neural connections in that part of your brain. So it strengthens. So then eventually by default, that becomes a lot easier.
Whoa. So this is definitely a tangible exercise everybody can start doing today if you feel like disconnected, if you feel you can't connect to that part of your body, because in spirituality, and again, I might not be a therapist, but as a clairvoyant, I see energy, right? And the way I describe it to the audience is when trauma occurs, what I see when I scan the body is there is no energy that flows through that part of the body. That's
I, I can feel it. So I have the feel. Yeah. So I
yeah,
feel, oh my God, I feel the blockages. Yeah.
right. So I scan it and I see that. That's the most visual
Yeah.
that I get. And there is kind of black or gray in because it lacks oxygen. It lacks the prana, the chi.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, if you can get in touch with the body, like Kristina is saying, then there are ways, and I believe in visualization, I believe in meditation, I believe in subconscious reprogramming where you can regenerate that part of the body, but it's only through processing your emotions that have been trapped there.
Yeah. And I think to that point, because that part of your brain. So here's a good example. A lot of people that have trauma struggle with meditation, and I did for a long time, and I judged myself like, why can't I meditate like other people? It's because if your amygdala has grown larger in volume because of high levels of stress running through your system, your amygdala is trying to run the show and run your body. Your
Mm.
prefrontal cortex, as we said, that's the part of your brain you need to be able to meditate effectively. So a lot of things in Western medicine and Western culture are, and I try to say this with so much love and kindness, are not for everybody, but
Yeah.
they make it like it is. And then we as trauma survivors feel like failures because we can't get it to work for us.
Mm.
Meditation is phenomenal, but you kind of have to work your way up to it.
Yeah.
Like work your way up to feeling your body, being in your body. Holotropic breath work is another one, which for some people works really well because it forces it, but sometimes that can be even too intense for trauma survivors. So it's
Yeah.
like finding the thing that works for you. For me, gentle methods worked best. So I started with the tapping.
Mhm.
I started with the movements, with the stretches, with just slowing down and just naming things as I went. Like it was as simple for me as I am brushing my teeth. I am brushing my teeth. And it
Mm.
sounds really silly, but that's how we deactivate the amygdala enough for the brain to start to rewire itself. And then eventually you'll start to notice that those other modalities start to come a lot easier. And I think that's when the snowball effect happens, when you start to see
Mhm.
all, and then you can do the exercises that feel more powerful and start to regenerate and start to do all of these things. That's why for me with this disability, I'm not there yet, but I'm 99.99% sure that I can cure it, fix it, it will be gone. Because I've
Absolutely.
come so far in ways doctors didn't think was possible. Like I couldn't walk 3 years ago and I can hike through the woods now. Albeit
Wow.
it's short periods of time, like maybe
Mhm.
I used to be able to walk for a minute. Now I can walk for maybe 10 minutes. But the fact that I couldn't walk before and I can now, like, speaks to the testament of healing can happen when you find the right tools for
Mhm.
you.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah. So important. So what you're saying is three things, like stay anchored to the present moment. That's when you slow down the amygdala. Then make sure that you choose what works for you. And
Yeah.
this is actually the most important step, I feel like, because I felt a failure when maybe they gave me EMDR or, they try to, um, yeah, introduce me to different healing modalities. Hypnotherapy. I've tried them, almost all of them. I mean, I can't say all of them, but I'm a healing junkie. So I was like, let me try all of this. And I felt like a failure because it wasn't working. Went to therapy, all of those things, right?
Yeah.
Until I found what worked for me, which was
Mhm.
subconscious reprogramming. Then I got certified in it. Then I was like, yeah, but there's also energy work. So I combined the neuroscience with the spirituality, but it worked for me, right? It was like
Yeah.
a technique that was like, whoa, I'm healing PTSD in 2 sessions. I'm time bending it. And great. But for you, it might be something else. And that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's what I started to discover and I started to talk about even more because I began to recognize even with the people that I would come across with were like, you have to try this. This is the only thing that works.
Mhm.
I think we just need to be more clear in our language to people that are on this journey of like what works for one person doesn't work for another because biology is different.
Yeah.
If you get it from a spiritual perspective of the karma that we carry or our
Right.
soul's journey or our purpose, like there are so many different unique factors and we are unique humans. And from a loving perspective, have self-compassion and love for yourself and think like, okay, that doesn't work for me. What else can I try? I think
Yeah, and
that's
then that's
the
a
thing
third piece that you said. It's like that self-compassion and
is
yeah.
huge, so huge. I almost want to say that's the number one thing because as when we have trauma, we learn to beat ourselves up. Like we are our number one bully.
Mhm.
We don't give ourselves enough grace. So
Mhm.
one of the things that helped me was someone had said to me one time, like, what would you do for your daughter? What is the love and compassion and kindness you would show for your daughter? Can you show that to yourself? And it was hard. But once I finally did, a lot more started taking off too, because I'm like, especially with my inner child, that was a huge piece for me too, of that little girl who didn't get those things and being able to show that to her.
Yeah.
Uh, I was actually on with my Cleveland Clinic doctor yesterday, and she was talking about the science of self-compassion because we were
Mhm.
just getting to a discussion. I'm like, yeah, self-compassion can actually change your biology too. So just it's the little pieces. I think that's another thing to mention is sometimes it's not just one thing.
Mhm.
Maybe it's 3 or 4 things that you create as part of your toolbox that you use consistently, and then you evolve, and then maybe you add things or you change things out. And that's, for me, was really important too, of realizing that, like, okay, just because this works today doesn't mean it's going to work tomorrow, and that's okay too.
Absolutely. Small steps. And
Yeah.
then what you're saying is, I believe this absolutely firmly, is everything is a stage in life,
Yeah.
which means if, meditation or EMDR, whatever, it works for you right now, that might not mean that it works for you next year because you're
Yeah.
evolving.
Yeah.
And then something else will come through. And then you need to upgrade to the next tool that's given to you.
I love that, because that really speaks to a lot of stuff I've been studying recently, even from spiritual growth, like all aspects of growth. If you consider it an upward spiral, and
Right.
it's endless in the sense of it's what's it called, like cyclical progression, I think. So
Hmm.
it's, you think about it that way, it's just, you're gonna keep cycling upwards. And even if you're in a trauma healing journey, for anybody listening right now and you're like, you feel like you're at the beginning and you haven't made any progress, I always encourage people, like, look at where you've come from, look at the progress that you have made, even if it's small. And my doctor reminded me this yesterday, because I told her I'm still struggling with fatigue, and she said, well, can you quantify that? And I started to think about it, and, like, you know what, a year and a half ago, my
Right.
bookshelf, I couldn't put my books, I had to put my books right here because I couldn't reach 6 inches to the right. I didn't have enough energy to
Hmm.
do that. And I'm like, I just reset up my bookshelf and I put my books on the other side. I'm like, it's easy
Right.
to overlook that, but I don't think we should. I think when we're healing, like, that's a win and you should celebrate that.
And we don't celebrate enough. And
No,
we're very hard on ourselves. Like you said, we're the worst self critic.
yeah,
And if we can quantify that, it's true. That's the biggest. I call it the bragging journal.
yeah,
And it's like write all of the small wins, even if it's like I walked for 10 minutes, because even when I started, I had major trauma actually after I started meditating, right? I was introduced to meditation and all of and somatic movement at 19, but my biggest trauma happened when I was 26, exiting an abusive, emotionally abusive relationship,
yeah,
PTSD, all of the brain damage that comes with narcissist.
yeah.
And I come from the background of being an athlete
Mm,
to the point of my body not being able to even hike. And I was just like, this is a new me that I don't know.
yeah.
But it was just very much of, like you said, compassion with myself every day. I'm like, I did a 10 minutes walk. I did a 20 and then I'm exhausted. And now I can run again. And now I can hike again. So, I mean, it took 5 years for me. But again, do not ever compare yourself. My
That's a
journey is my
huge one
journey.
too, because
Yeah.
it would be easy for me to sit here and be like, well, I can't run, and I don't know if I will be. Like, just for anybody that's listening, it's
Yeah.
can be so easy to compare ourselves. And we're even very different, right? Like, my
Yeah.
disability means that if I walk for 10 minutes, I am elated because that is just
Yeah.
beyond to skip. But I've recognized to honor that part of myself and to honor, like, this part of my journey and to love myself unconditionally. Cause I'm like, the spiritual piece for me has been really important, of like, okay, what is this teaching me? And it's, part of it is teaching me to
Mhm.
slow down, because I lived my life trying to run through things. Like, I was trying to run through a brick wall, which is not who I am.
Right.
So it's allowed me to embrace, like, the gentle, soft side of myself. And I think when we can find those unique pieces of us instead of comparing,
Hmm.
because it's so easy, especially in our society, it's so easy to
Yeah.
compare.
It's the worst demon, the comparison. Yeah, will keep you stuck. But
Yeah.
um yeah, so anything else that you think it's relevant for the audience as we come to a closure to hear about trauma?
Um, I think a couple of things. Medical gaslighting is real. So if the
Mhm.
doctor has dismissed you, have compassion. Doctors are human too, and it's very unfortunate they are not trauma. informed. They're not trained to understand how trauma impacts the body. Researching mind, body, spirit, holistic healing, and health is crucial because you are a whole human being.
Mm.
And yeah, self compassion and just love for yourself and recognizing where you're triggered and allowing yourself to have grace with taking a step back from things that are triggering. And granted, you can't do that in all aspects of your life, especially if you're in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
But if you can find ways to step away from triggers and give your body a little bit of rest and compassion, that's huge.
Yes. Oh my God, that last one hit me because it's like just the last thing I want to mention is it's what you were saying at the beginning is when trauma occurs, then it's kind of like the brain gets rewired and we seek that familiarity of almost always running toward traumatic experiences.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, so if you can allow yourself to identify that that's your pattern, because I always chose, the emotionally unavailable or narcissistic personality, right? And I was like, why am I doing that? Because my brain was programmed that way. And then
It felt
realizing,
comfortable. So even
huh?
though it's not necessarily healthy, your brain chooses comfort because it's
Exactly.
pattern. Yeah. So if you can start to look for the patterns in your life and you start to peel back the layers, like the symptom is the symptom, but if you can get to the core, that's
Right.
when you really start making those big changes.
Yeah. And so what you just said is like allowing yourself to rest and move away from the triggers. That's everything.
Yeah. And
It will be uncomfortable.
it will. And that's been the last 3 years of my life is literally what I've had to focus on since I stepped away from my career. Had climbed the corporate ladder as a VP of marketing,
Mhm.
had a 6-figure job, and I lost it all. But I am still very, very grateful. Like I'm working to
Mm,
gain that independence back. But I've been able to step away and slow down
yeah.
and listen to my body. And that's why I've been able to radically heal because I was still trying to fight it. Like the entire time, I'm still trying to fight it and force my way through it. Then when I started to recognize, really quick before we go, because I know we're short on time, I cut off contact with my family. Like that's how bad it was. Like it was just, I couldn't
Mm,
do it anymore. And I'm like, I need to just cut these, I couldn't do it anymore. And I realized that it was killing my body. And I've been able to reestablish connection, but it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. And that's
mm.
why that self compassion is really, really big too.
This is so important for people to hear. I have clients that had to cut literally contact with
Yeah.
one or multiple family members.
Yeah.
Thank God. I mean, it wasn't my experience. We came close to it, but it was enough for me to, I don't know, travel overseas and move overseas. Enough
That's why
space.
when I was in Hawaii, it was kind of my safe place in a lot of different
Mhm.
ways. And I recognized that it was very triggering because I had to come back to be around family and it was too much.
It that's so important because so many people feel so guilty of even thinking of doing that, cutting ties, going through the process of being the black sheep in the family, even if they already are, but even
Yep.
more.
Yep.
So we get stuck in the guilt and the shame. And it's okay if you do it for as long as you need to do it until I think it's until you get strong enough.
I agree. That's what happened for me. It was my mom specifically. So my mom, was a narcissist. That was very difficult. Like I didn't have an emotional connection with my mom. She was my first bully. So
Yeah.
I learned that pattern of relationships and took it in every relationship that I had pretty much. And then when I finally came back, I noticed the impact it was having on my daughter. And that's when I said, I can't allow this to happen, but I don't know what else to do. Like I've tried to set boundaries,
Mm,
but every time I would try to communicate with her, like it would just my body, I could feel it would physically just shut down. And it was the fight or flight was happening. And I didn't know it. It took it was 2 years of EMDR. And I finally got to the point where I'm like, I think I could talk to her again and I would be okay, which
mm.
I never dreamed, never thought could happen.
Wow.
When I reached out and my entire family had shunned me. They were very angry at me.
Mhm.
I didn't have anybody. I still relationships are still difficult in the sense that that's part of my trauma that I'm working through. But once I started re-engaging with them, I was very surprised that I was able to set my boundaries, to hold them firmly,
Mm,
call them out when they weren't being met. I never dreamed that that was possible, but that's what happens when you heal your body from the impact trauma.
wow.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. Yeah. So there is hope. And what I tell people is if you take a break,
Yep.
get your spirit, I call it spiritual strength, but it's your emotional, physical, everything back,
A little bit. Yeah.
then you're much, much stronger to handle difficult situation. And you can also shift. So my journey has been shifting relationships. The more I shifted me, I was able to shift the relationship with my parents, which was hard in different ways. Um, and shift the relationship with the abuser, which unfortunately not everyone can block those
Yeah.
people because maybe you need to still have contact due
Yeah.
to court reason, kids
Mhm.
reason, you know? So you have to learn the process of taking care of yourself, setting boundaries, regaining your spiritual side. But anyway, so shifting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you're saying.
Hmm.
Love it. So how can people and where can people find you?
So I am on Instagram, Awakened Mom Life, awakenmomlife.com. And
Mhm,
I have a new project, which you mentioned, the Collective Healers, which is more for the wounded healers, kind of like us, the ones that are looking to embrace their gifts and expand their gifts, but maybe aren't sure how or
mhm.
what to do. So thecollectivehealers.com. I'm also on Instagram. You can find me there.
Thank you so much, Christina. This has been so insightful. I'm pretty sure everybody's going to love the episode as I love talking about trauma. Everybody has it. So,
You know, I could talk about it for, yeah, hours too myself. So if I can help and be of service in any way, I feel like that was the meaning for me going through everything that I did and being able to bring this to the world in a
mhm.
way that can help other people find their light. Because I think that's what we're here in this time period. Like there's so much more light to be brought to this world. And I think it just needs to be done through some trauma healing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.